Hi, I couldn't really do a goofy green screen intro for this video, so I'm just gonna start with me talking. Oh, and if you haven't guessed already, this is... Yeah, I know that joke doesn't really work because this isn't a video about Invincible, but fuck you, coming up with intros is hard. My Adventures with Superman. Having just finished its second season, it's a show that I've heard a lot of buzz about and have a very complicated relationship with. Now, if you've seen my review of Season 1, link in the description by the way, you'll know that I've had my issues with the show in the past. But with Season 2, I didn't really have the reaction I expected. This show actually does a lot of things right, but it also does a lot of things wrong. Thankfully, I've been able to break down those wrongdoings into a handful of categories that I'm going to go over before giving my final thoughts on the show. There's a lot to talk about, so let's get right into it with our first topic. Oh, and I'll be color coding the border of the video to show what category I'm picking from, so watch out for that. As usual, I'd like to get the small stuff out of the way first, so here's a lightning round of all the issues that I took with the show that aren't exactly serious but are more based on personal preference. These are the nitpicks. Since he's in the show now, I feel like Hank Henshaw should look more like Clark than he does, especially since there's a possibility that he'll become Cyborg Superman. Kryptonian tech is extremely advanced, but for some reason it took it months to interpret English. While running away from Superman, Livewire initially zaps away in energy form and then just starts running on foot for seemingly no reason. They do that thing where one character is eavesdropping on another, but they leave before the other character finishes their sentence so they think they said something mean. I'm really not fond of the anime references, they got kinda old in the first season. The brain sounds like Mort from the Madagascar movies.
I will access the security system and loot the cameras.
And that's all for the nitpicks. With those out of the way, let's get on to our next topic. The animation for the show has improved. Sort of. Now, I have definitely noticed less super obvious bits where mistakes were made and the animation gets super choppy, but notice I said less and not none. Now, don't get me wrong, throughout the show there is a lot of really nice animation, some really good shots, and some very, very good background art. But for every one of those moments, there are also moments where the animation looks choppy, moments where the character's proportions look off, and moments where I can count the fucking frames they used. And I know that compared to the show as a whole, these moments are relatively small, but once you do start to notice them, it gets pretty easy for more of them to become super obvious, and it sort of pulls you out of the viewing experience. I feel like a possible explanation for the drastic shift in quality between the animation of some scenes and other scenes might be the budget. Now, while I haven't been able to find out what exactly the budget is for this show as of yet, I feel like it's safe to say that the production team focused their efforts more on some scenes than others in order to get the show finished efficiently. That is understandable, but really I feel like it isn't entirely necessary when there are other ways to cut down on the budget, namely getting rid of unnecessary scenes. For example, take this scene where Clark and Lois are investigating in a prison. While they're snooping and looking around the cells, Clark rips open the door of one and looks inside before verifying that nobody is there, despite the fact that there are not only bars but a big window on the door that could have told him all he needed to know. Or he simply could have stood still and looked through the cell with his X-ray vision to verify that nobody was there. Effort and money was wasted on this scene and scenes like it when they really didn't need to be. The effort and money wasted on these scenes could have gone into refining the animation to give it a more consistent quality. Then maybe we wouldn't have had so many moments where the characters move strangely or cry out of their fucking cheeks. Like, I'm actually very curious about how they fucked that up. Like, why is she crying from her cheek? Is that just how Kryptonians work? Tears are stored in the cheeks? Anyway, the show would have really benefited from having the production team's efforts be more balanced and focused on making the show one consistent quality, rather than focusing heavily on some scenes more than others. I would rather have a show that ranges from good animation to very good animation than have a show that ranges from okay animation to great animation, if that makes sense. Anyway, let's get moving to our next topic. Something I noticed while watching this show is that because of several aspects that are lacking, a lot of the show has a distinct absence of, for lack of a better word, sauce. And I feel a lot of that can be attributed to how the music is used and how the characters are designed. When it comes to the music, I'll be frank, I'm convinced that they simply do not know how to use it sometimes. Most of the soundtrack is sauceless, basic, and unmemorable, especially compared to like 90% of other DC shows. And the opening theme is so basic that when I played it out loud for a friend, he thought it was an ad. And it's not like they're incapable of making a cool score. The ending theme as well as some of the music in the episodes are actually pretty good. It would have been way better if they just took the ending theme or some of the music from one of the episodes and swapped it in for the opening theme. Some of the music in the episodes also has a problem with not being in the right place. For example, take Superman's first confrontation with Atomic Skull.
Consider yourself obsolete.
The music in this very short fight is okay, but I don't think it's anywhere near as good as it should be, especially when this is what played just a few scenes earlier where basically nothing was happening.
Come on! Everybody out! Go, go, go!
After the test subjects.
Why use such an exciting, high-energy part of the soundtrack for a scene where people are basically just standing around when a boss battle is like the next scene? Pairing that mid-ass music with a fight scene that's already really short just makes it way less impactful. And while using underwhelming music is bad enough, sometimes the music that they use is overwhelming for the scene that it's in. For example, take the scene where Clark and Lois are escaping from the Black Mercy mind control simulation thing. I don't know what to call it.
It is useless to...
You really don't know anything about us, do you?
You thought if you put me in a cage, everyone else would just roll over.
You thought we'd just let you hurt our friends, our family, our world?
Stop them!
You thought we were alone, just like you. But we have...
And we'll always have each other!
Now, it's not that the moment doesn't call for some sort of energetic, triumphant music, it's that the piece that they chose is just too energetic. It just makes the scene feel a bit crowded, if that makes any sense. But enough about that for now, let's talk about the designs. Now, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, like 90% of the designs look like 100% booty ass. One or two of the suits are fine, but most of them are just boring, bland, and a huge downgrade from their comic counterparts. I mean, come on. What the fuck is this? Task Force X looks like shit, Steel looks like shit, Brainiac just looks okay. And what did they do to Damage? Why does he look like that? The new suits that they did for Supergirl and Superman are just meh. The only one that they really got right was Atomic Skull. He looks genuinely cool. But even some of the cool looking suits have aspects of them that are just weird. Like this one. This one looks really good, but why is his chest uncovered and why are the grippers out? What's the purpose of that? Which, by the way, actually reminds me of an issue that I was going to talk about in my first review video but forgot. Despite being boring and bland, some of these suits are just poorly designed in terms of functionality too. Roughhouse's weapons are these battering ram looking things that go over his arms, and are held on partially by these straps that go around his palms. It does not make sense for a piece of tech that only straps on to the top of his arms and doesn't even cover his hands or any other part of his body to enhance his strength. For Steel's suit, not only is it a huge downgrade, but apparently it was built to withstand
fire, sub-zero temperatures, you name it.
But if that's the case, then why the fuck is there a big-ass opening where a helmet should be? Last and certainly least, we have Heatwave. Heatwave's whole thing, as you can guess, is fire. And in Season 1, we see that there's even a mode on the suit that can make the fire really, really hot. So why then are there gigantic open spots on the suit where she could get burned? And it's not like the production team don't know this. In the scene where her suit's going supernova or whatever, there's a protective covering that goes over her face, but it still leaves her arms and shit exposed. But I digress. Now let's move on to our most important topic yet. The writing for this show is... I'm not even sure I can summarize it in a single word, just let me explain. On one hand, the writing is pretty good and there are lots of things that work. On the other hand, it's kinda shitty and some things aren't well thought out. Before we get to some of the larger problems, there are a lot of choices in the writing that just made me go, what? Why? Like the decision to make the Kryptonians a bunch of warmongers who not only take over other planets and add them to their empire, but have powers on Krypton. So they're basically Viltrumites. Why? I'm not even sure if this is a good or bad thing to have happen in the universe, but it's just something that happens. Keeping up with the theme of things kinda just happening, Mala and Brain being in the show and being a couple is kinda just wrong. Like, out of all the things you could have added to the show, you added a monkey and a brain being married. And I know it happened in the comics before, but it's still weird. The entire existence of Heatwave in this show is also pretty inducing. Like, you already had a female fire-controlling Superman villain at your disposal, but instead you chose to kidnap and gender swap a Flash villain? Just... why? Last but not least, the way kryptonite works just doesn't really make sense. When kryptonite is exposed to a Kryptonian, it makes them grow little crystals on their bodies when they're exposed to it for too long, which I guess kind of makes sense. But then, why does it do the same thing to Kryptonian technology? That just doesn't make sense. Getting to the meat of this topic, there are a bunch of different problems that are repeated throughout the entire show that kind of bring the writing down. The writers have a habit of reducing items or characters to the point where it's just like, what's the point anymore? For example, like I explained in my first review video, they seem to have some sort of obsession with reducing things to just tech. That trend has not only continued in Season 2, but kind of gotten worse, especially since they reduced Metallo to just a bunch of generic fighter robots powered by kryptonite when he's an actual interesting character. They've taken villains whose characters are interesting and compelling partially because of their powers and how their powers affect them, and reduced them to either glorified props or uninteresting NPCs who hardly have any character and don't add much to the story besides some villain of the week type shit and brief appearances in later episodes. And when those appearances do happen and the characters get some kind of emotional or impactful moment, it means nothing because we have nothing to prop it up with. On many levels, a show is only as good as its villains, and this show embarrassingly fumbles a lot of them. There are several exceptions to this, but not nearly enough to excuse all the other ones. Similar to a point that I brought up a minute ago, another problem is that sometimes moments that are meant to be impactful to the plot in some way happen, but they aren't thought all the way through, so they end up not making sense or bringing down otherwise good writing. For examples, in episode 5, Hank Henshaw appears aside Superman in a Most Eligible Bachelor contest and ends up making a statement that contributes to Superman's confidence issues later. But it doesn't make sense for Hank to even be in this scene at the contest in order to make that statement anyway, because he's not a bachelor.
I'm leaving soon. Flying the wife to Paris.
In this episode 6 scene, which is one of the biggest catalysts for Supergirl becoming a good guy, she forces herself into seeing a carving that depicts her destroying the Thanagarians, something that was erased from her memory. But the very existence of this carving makes no sense. In the scene, we see that the carving is cloaked so Kara doesn't realize what she's done, which means Brainiac is the one who cloaked it. But if that's the case, why not just destroy it? He went through the trouble of traveling all the way to Thanagar just to cloak the carving, but he didn't think to just blow it up. And before you say that Brainiac probably didn't go to Thanagar and the cloak was just a byproduct of some mental block put in Kara's head, that can't be the case because Clark definitely doesn't have a mental block and he couldn't see the carving either. This one's kinda small, but whatever. In episode 4, there's a short Toyman cameo where Lois and her dad are talking to him before they get interrupted by some of the villains, and they end up getting away from the bad guys for a bit because of this explosive teddy bear that's just out in the open on a shelf. Why would an actual explosive teddy bear just be on the shelf in the middle of a shop that he runs? In episode 7, Jimmy recruits Livewire in order to help him steal a ship to save Clark, and later on Livewire reveals that she and Heatwave came up with a different plan that they used secretly. But that doesn't make sense because that plan hinges on things that they could not have known about beforehand, like Amanda Waller being in Star Labs at the time of the robbery. Speaking of Amanda Waller, the writers kinda made her needlessly incompetent in some bits, like when she insisted that the Metallo robots were a success because they could withstand Kryptonian tech and metahuman abilities.
At only 10% capacity, it stood up to alien tech weapons and superpowers.
When that is very clearly not the case. They can't even stand up to regular bullets. Episode 8 is the best episode of the season, and it's probably the most well written until you get to the end of it. Because at the end of the episode, after Brainiac takes over Clark's body and starts using him as a puppet, Lois takes one of the Black Mercy mind control things and puts it on her own head in order to go into the simulation and get Clark out. But there was no opportunity in any of the episodes for Lois to even get her hands on one of the Black Mercy headpieces. There is a tiny moment where Lois notices the headbands, but if you take a look at where they're positioned in relation to where she is, it's completely impossible for her to have reached them. This one tiny moment is not only the foundation of the entire plot of the next episode, but it's the entire reason that the good guys end up winning in the end. And it all hinges on the fact that Lois has an item that she could not possibly have gotten. There are a couple more examples, but that one was probably the biggest by far, and I don't really feel like covering all of them. Rounding off this category, I feel like another problem the writing has is convenience and repetition. Characters with important information conveniently show up exactly where they need to be. While they were in the ship looking for Clark, Lois and the others arrived exactly where Kara was, even though there was nothing that would have led them to her. And Superman conveniently gets the exact power that he needs to deal with the situation and then conveniently knows how to use it exactly right, even when he has no practice with it. And the thing is, these moments in and of themselves aren't bad, they just lack tiny bits of explanation that would have made it all okay. It would have made sense if this kid was waiting outside the Daily Planet instead of some random park bench. The writers could have had Mala and Brain rig up the ship to track the energy signature of Kara's suit. And they could just say that Superman learns quickly. Very small changes could have made these annoying conveniences better. As for repetition, the two biggest examples I can think of are Clark and Lois's relationship and the last fight with Brainiac. In both the first and the second season, Clark and Lois have problems with their relationship that are caused by misunderstanding or issues that could be solved with a 2-minute conversation. But it just keeps happening, and it's kind of annoying, especially since the relationship hasn't gone on that long. Last but not least, in the final fight with Brainiac, Clark and Kara have that obligatory victorious moment where they band together and push Brainiac all the way to the sun. And it is a pretty good moment that I enjoyed watching. But directly after that, they have another moment where Brainiac ejects part of his ship and starts shooting a kryptonite laser at them, so they band together again and have a second victorious beating the bad guy moment. But then, Brainiac ejects from the ejected part of his ship and tries to attack Kara, which leads to a third and final victorious beating the bad guy moment. At the end of this whole sequence, I was just like, okay. They had a good, impactful, triumphant scene to start, but they made it cheap by doing it 3 times back to back. Maybe somebody should tell them less is more. That may have been a little bit long-winded, but we finally made it to the end of the video where I give my final thoughts. Like I said at the beginning of this video, I did not have the reaction that I expected watching Season 2. Despite still having a lot of problems, it's a definite upgrade from Season 1. The character dynamics are great, the writing is way more compelling, the animation and settings are way better, and even some of the suit designs are better. While sitting down to watch all the episodes and record my thoughts on things that the show did wrong, I found myself writing less and less notes, to the point where I started to ask myself, do I actually like this show? And the answer to that question is yes. Sitting and thinking about it, I can honestly say that in a lot of different ways, I wholeheartedly enjoy this show. Yes, it has an array of problems that need to be fixed, but it's also a great representation of Superman's hope, perseverance, and kindness paired with his strength. Overall, this is a very good portrayal of Superman contained within a story that isn't bad, but just needs to fix a few things. Season 2 of My Adventures with Superman is a massive improvement from Season 1, and with any luck, I sincerely hope that this trend of improvement continues into Season 3. With all of that being said, I give My Adventures with Superman Season 2 a flexible but fair 7 out of 10. If you're someone who hasn't seen the show yet, I'm not really sure what you're doing here considering I just spoiled everything, but either way, I recommend checking it out. It's definitely worth a chance. Hi, if you got this far, that probably means you watched the entire video. You didn't just skip to the end, right? Anyway, if you've gotten this far, I'd like to thank you for listening to me yap about nerd shit for 20 minutes. This is the largest project I've made so far, and I plan to make a lot more in the future. If you liked what you saw, you can respectfully stalk me on any and all of these neglected platforms where I assure you more content is on the way. But that's all for now, thank you for watching.